could be nominated by party provinces and at the party's national conventional conference in 2017 to replace Zuma. There's also been various other names mentioned, but usually the person who's going to become the next president will be either from the cabinet or the very top of the political party.
From neoliberalism to corruption, is the ANC what it was 20 years ago?
Perhaps the most vivid illustration of the difference is that when the first Democratic Parliament was elected in 1994, out of 260 members of Parliament, none were businessmen. They were all working class people, or they were white collar people, professionals such as teachers. In the Senate, that is the National Council of Provinces, the ANC had one businessman among its senators, Sam Watson-Yani, who had managed against all odds to become a black millionaire by building up chain stores in the ghettos under the apartheid system. At the latest count today, 2016, 2/3 of ANC members of Parliament have directorships in companies. And those companies will, of course, have usually offered them the directorships on the expectation that the MP will then lobby ferociously to get that company state tenders. So that illustrates the very dramatic shift. Another illustration of that is that in 1994, Parliament set up a creche for the children of all MPs, because about 1/3 of its MPs were women and many of them were mothers.
You're going to have to explain what a creche is.
Okay.
To me as an American, it's a Christmas set.
Oh, okay. Creche here means, would it be called the kindergarten or early childhood development center?
Probably a daycare center.
A daycare center for infants and children, young children of it there. Now, Parliament has closed down its creche about 5 years ago, because today MP salaries has been raised so high, about R1 million a year, that all of them can afford to hire nannies or full-time private child care for their families, and they thus do not need Parliament to provide this. So these are symptoms of the emergence of a political and a state elite, as of course in every other country in the world.
Something has occurred to me. I think the generation that took over in the 90s had been educated before apartheid. You've got a generation coming up that was educated under apartheid, but to make the transition to the real post-apartheid generation, I think maybe you've got a really bumpy spot there. How do you see South Africa getting through that?
The major difference is this. Before liberation, the only people who would join the African National Congress and its rivals like Pan-Africanist Congress would of course be highly committed, highly motivated idealists, political activists, because you could expect no gain and no benefits from joining the ANC. You could expect only at best harassment, persecution, dismissal from work, and at worst detention without trial and assassination. But once the African National Congress has been years in power, it normalizes its party structure. That is, the idealists are a seasoning of a huge crowd of run-of-the-mill persons, ambitious politicians, opportunists, normal persons. And the idealists are a minority within the bulk of party members. So that normalization hugely affects both what the party does and how it operates. Today, of course, to have an adult memory of apartheid, you would have to be over 46 years old. For the younger generation, they have not ever seen in their lives signboard saying whites only. But of course, for the majority of them, there has been relatively little change in that they are still living in huge black townships and shanty towns, and their life chances are of unemployment for about 40% and limited to blue-collar jobs, the worst paid jobs for many others. The ANC has put in place a welfare state as generous as a third world country that does not have oil or gas could afford. So the percentage of South Africans living predominantly of state welfare grants has risen from 5% to about 40% of the country. The government does not pay a dole, that is an annual welfare grant, to an unemployed person directly. But the reality is that every old age pension, which has now been raised to the white level, is of course feeding the unemployed middle-aged children of that granny or grandpa. The reality of the millions of childcare grants is that the childcare grant is of course feeding the unemployed mother of that child as well as the baby. So in that sense there is a big trickle-down effect of all these social welfare grants. But since South Africa is not Scandinavia, these grants are very austere. They are just a lifeline for the necessities of day-to-day existence. For example, the medical research indicates that about 1/5 of South African children remain stunted, suffering from hunger for parts of each month. So these are flashing red lights of the need to do more.
What have been the greatest successes of the ANC since taking power?
The greatest successes, I would say, have been, first of all, the child care grant I referred to a moment ago. It's a lifeline for millions and millions of children of unemployed parents. The school feeding schemes and building over 2 million, now it's close on 3 million houses. Unlike United States public housing, which is mostly high-rise apartment blocks for rental, in South Africa, public housing takes the form of freestanding houses which are given by the taxpayers as a gift to an unemployed black family with the title deeds to that plot of land and the house. So it is in theirs. The houses, typically known as RDP housing, from the Reconstruction and Development Program, which was the ANC's 1994 election manifesto, also come with a life exemption for unemployed and indigent families from all property taxes, from municipal service charges, and a ration of free electricity and free water per month. These concessions the ANC refers to as a social wage as opposed to a cash wage. It means that in a paternalistic left sense, the social wages cannot be squandered by demoralized unemployed persons on alcohol or drugs, because they're not given as a cash payment, they're given as free rations of water, electricity, free rubbish collection, etc. So those perhaps have been among the ANC's biggest successes. Also very important has been the ANC has built over 200 clinics in rural areas for free health care, and it has reallocated the posts for doctors and nurses out of huge tertiary hospitals in the white suburbs into clinics and hospitals in the black townships and in the rural areas. These clinics, of course, form the front line for administering the world's biggest HIV/AIDS program of antiretroviral medicines. I think, is it about 5 million people are on these, and it's the largest free AIDS medicine project in the world. Here, the medicines are still coming as foreign aid grants from the United States. In effect, US taxpayers the nation to US pharmaceutical companies, who then send on these medicines free to South Africa. The South African costs are for the pharmacists and the dispensary infrastructure to administer these medicines. So this is another, I think, really important government achievement that it can rightly boast about.
What have been the greatest failures or regrets of the ANC?
The greatest failure of the ANC is clearly that we need 7 million jobs that can be done by persons without grade 12. The unemployment rates remain very high in the mid-30s. I think the worst unemployment rate in the USA is for the municipality of Pontiac in Greater Detroit, which is about 30%. And when I was a Fulbright scholar there, Detroit itself had an unemployment rate of about 20%. Now, the worst cases for the USA are the national average unemployment for South Africa. And this is an enormously daunting challenge in the 21st century because of the automation and robotization of the whole secondary sector, manufacturing. The jobs aren't there anymore, and the new jobs being created by the IT revolution typically require more than grade 12. They require at least college diplomas in writing software. So this, I think, is the most serious long-term problem of the ANC, and the consequences of permanent high unemployment are devastating social pathologies. Alcoholism, drug addiction, demoralization, a very high crime rate of violent crime among unemployed young men. So these are all really serious problems which continue to face South Africa. Another problem is that the ANC can have no excuse that after 20 years in power, 4 out of 5 schools do not yet have libraries, do not yet have science laboratories. That could have been completed within 5 years, and only now is the ANC making a serious effort to build libraries onto existing grade schools. The black grade schools simply never had libraries in the past, and the white schools did.
What policies should the ANC have done differently, or what should they change now?
There, we're looking at a fairly complex environment where there are arguments both for and against, and getting the nuance right is the challenge. The ANC came to power in 1994 just after all the communist governments had either collapsed and moved to market or mixed economies from state command economies, or the surviving ones like China, followed by Vietnam, and now followed by Cuba, were to dramatically shift from a command economy to a mixed economies. So that meant the ANC was constrained in the policy options that were feasible for it. It correctly avoided at all costs borrowing money from the IMF or the World Bank. The costs of doing that were that it had to cap expenditure at the level it was in the apartheid government's budgets, but simply reallocate the budget from whites and to a small extent colours and Indians to blacks of it there. It also had to pay back a huge national debt that the apartheid regime had accumulated to subsidize a warfare state, a highly militarized state that had about the 6th largest military industrial complex in the world, that was exporting armaments by the end of apartheid. It faced huge pressures from the West and the World Trade Organization, which acts as a proxy of Western demands, to abolish protective customs tariffs and permit free trade. This had the consequence that 3/4 of all clothing and textile workers in Cape Town were retrenched when cheap Chinese imported textiles and clothes came in. And these are some of the things where the ANC could have fought harder and played for time by phrasing these things over a longer period. It also needed to have set up think tanks among the chambers of commerce and business about how to adapt to cheap Chinese clothes imports. For example, the quick and nimble strategy of where a line of good selling clothes runs out in the chain stores, and the chain stores want to place an order for extra garments. Here, the imports from China would take a couple of weeks to come by shipping freight, whereas the local factories can produce such clothes within about 3 days. So these are some of the things that the ANC needs to be